To start off, a concept which I found very interesting in trying to understand the presence of Asia and growing Asian stories in Hollywood was Reorientalism. Now, this would typically refer to how the stereotype for Asians in Hollywood is representing them as morally corrupt and a separated other that is used as a tool to reinforce the hierarchies between East and the West. Now, we discussed this briefly in the first episode, but the concept of Orientalism falls under post colonial theory, where people like Edward Said have contributed greatly to understanding the nuances between the colonized and the colonizer. So, the East is constantly represented as an exoticized other. One observed development now is how the East itself participates in producing and supporting these stereotypes. So, Edward Said note says that the East itself is becoming a creator or a co creator in Orientalism, which happens through the process of using the existing stereotypes and reproducing the dominant tropes in a way that enforces self representation, and it's a response to Orientalism. So, this method of reorientalism emerges and becomes a way of self representation. This can and should be seen as an act of defiance against dominant stereotypes. It's not as passive as it seems. Since the colonized themselves use it as a means of rising above restrictions, an example of this from the novel is how Mozasu leaned into the stereotypes of Koreans and how Koreans earned wealth in Japan through pachinko parlors as a mode of making his living and his career and supporting his family. No, so Mozasu, the general film and media popular culture has been experiencing an influx of Asian content, may it be through rising Korean directors, filmmakers, popular K-dramas, or K-pop girl groups, boy groups. Korean culture itself has slowly become more present in the media sphere, and it continues to grow. At first, these stereotypes called K dramas cliche and cringe, and this criticism was also often used by online and different social cultures to demean women or young girls for enjoying the cliche romance of K dramas. But the growth in popularity of K dramas slowly has led to streaming sites like Netflix and Disney Plus investing billions into the K drama industry and producing more and more original K dramas every year or every quarter of the year. This has also increased the general public's ideas and interest into Korean culture and has taken a step back or into the stereotypes of K dramas, which were seen as cliche romances, but this was in fact just a stereotype. So, the series from the East have a lot more to offer in terms of plot and characters in all genres and to all main and side characters, and this itself is what started to attract people towards the Korean industry itself. In the new era of media communications, you have OTT platforms like Netflix and Apple TV Plus further utilize internet protocols to free the audiences from national borders of broadcast television. So you're providing stronger internet and more targeted programming. So while it may seem like the online distribution of media is killing television and that streaming culture is killing the viewing culture, in a way they're actually promoting and improving the way we consume different types of media, and instead of fixing them to one spatial area, it is globalizing the viewing process. So these streaming sites have started to expand the transnational reach of Korean film and television from a regional cultural industry to something that is popular globally. And it has enabled the broader production and distribution of K dramas and movies onto global streaming platforms. Adding to that, the popularity of K pop itself has fought through barriers of xenophobia, racism, and serial stereotyping to eventually become popular with the mainstream public in the West. Front runners of this battle have been artists like BTS, who were seen as the group that opened the gates to the West for everyone else and allowed their juniors like TXT and Hyphen and Stray Kids, among many others, to become popular names in K-pop globally. So this slow growth of Asian culture in the West, both through and past stereotypes, has led to an investment of the West into the stories from the East. And the major example of this is now Pachinko, with its own Apple TV adaptation. And since this network is a notable producer of critically acclaimed television and film, it gave Asian filmmakers, cast, and crew a very global platform But it also brings to question how Asian or Asian American producers adapted the story to suit Western audiences. In fact, one of the most exciting revelations for K drama fans globally was our very own Lee Min Ho, one of the K drama industry's biggest names. First, we can look at technical elements which were used by the creators of the show to bring Pachinko to the West, and second, notable observations on aspects of the story which were altered to suit Western audiences. So, Pachinko was reviewed as a K drama in American style, and while the novel tells the story in a linear manner, the show changed things around by presenting the story with flashbacks, jumps between past, present, future, and cross cutting. So, 80 years of Sunja's life are viewed as time jumps at different points of her life. Multilingualism was also used in presenting the show itself, and that, according to Time magazine, Pachinko is the largest multilingual show in the history of Hollywood. The writer of the show also noted on insisting that the show should only be offered to stream in native languages. The switching of languages plays a vital role in character building. It reflects cultural identities and personal history. Before the start of each episode, a user interface menu appears which states Pachinko is presented in its two original languages, Korean and Japanese. To turn on subtitles or dubbed audio, pause the video and choose the following icons. After, the interface continues to state Japanese dialogue subtitles in blue and Korean dialogue subtitles in yellow. And along with this, the creators also took the active creative decision that the audience would not be waiting for the show to automatically start playing. So, apart from narrative complexities, Pachinko demands the audience's capacity to listen to multiple languages and comprehend multi layered linguistic references. It makes Pachinko relatively challenging compared to other domestic themed melodramas, and it requires a great deal of attention to watch, whether it's in reading subtitles, identifying languages being spoken, or keeping up with the story world. Now, multilingualism is also utilized. While language is a major barrier in migration, because the incapability to speak a language cuts off the possibilities for a group to assimilate and integrate into the other. When people migrate, they're compelled to pick up new languages in order to start new lives. Meanwhile, they also try to remember the old languages as the most direct connection to their heritage. Eventually, people utilize multilingualism and translation to facilitate inconvenient situations due to language barriers. So the creators made active choices on subtitles and dubbing, and they decided that the source language in Pachinko is Korean, and the target languages are the over 40 languages of translated subtitles provided by Apple TV Plus. So the options appear to be abundant. However, the positions of languages become more ambiguous in dubbing. Only Korean dialogues are dubbed, and the Japanese and the English dialogues remain original. Mainly Anglophone and European languages are provided in dubbing, such as French, Spanish, Portuguese, and Italian. The dubbing options demonstrate that first, the acts of oral translation are still in Western terms, possibly due to the origin of the platform, and second, the Japanese language holds a strange position which is neither original nor targeted in the translation of this show. So, the strange position of the Japanese language coincides with the character's underlying psychology of not having a sense of belonging to Japan. The editing of the show cuts between past, present, and future, and it causes a constant relocation between Japan, Korea, and the US. Presenting the story in a non linear manner is also constantly relocating audiences themselves, and that too demands attention from the viewer. At the same time, the show creators also decided to release episodes on a weekly basis over a more bingeable release of all episodes, releasing on the same day, as most streaming services usually do. Through such formal techniques, the creators of the show are demanding audience attention in a way that typical Western media does not. The technical elements make it clear that the stories in Pachinko cannot be consumed in the background on the busy day, but must be actively watched rather than be passively viewed. They also chose to have title pages in three languages, English, Japanese, and Korean, overlaying the varying landscapes in the particular scene or episode. So, as audiences receive the televisual techniques, they are immersed in the same sense of displacement as the characters and in a constant question of where they are in the show. The audiences do not have the choice of ignoring or passively consuming Asian stories anymore. So the show presents a story of survival and persistence, and for this family, it follows the same plot as a novel. It switches things around with Solomon's storyline. In the show, Solomon's story follows an almost takedown of a large multinational capitalist company plot. It In the show, Solomon is sent to Japan from the US, and he spends the entire time trying to secure deals at his bank firm so he can get a promotion and go back to the US. In the middle of this, he gets tricked and blamed for the wrong deal where the Japanese bank is trying to buy land from an old Korean woman. In the show, the Solomon story mimics that of an American blockbuster action film. It requires secrecy, planning, cunning deviancy from the main character that is shockingly intellectual and attractive for the audience. In the book, on the other hand, there is much less of that. The book shows Solomon working in Japan by choice and struggling with his identity among prejudice and stereotype of racism from his colleagues. The show presents Solomon as turning towards pachinko parlors as a last resort, where he will utilize this part of his ancestry to advance over the Japanese CEOs who tricked him and blacklisted him in Japan. In the book, Solomon chooses to join his father's business after he gets fired for failing to secure a deal with a Korean grandmother. Both represent the same essence of plot, but the method of storytelling and the genre it fits the story into is starkly different. The show adopts a method of storytelling that entertains Western audiences and is fit for the screen, while the book focuses on tracing the rift between identity and belonging as immigrants in a third space, which can be observed as part of Solomon's narrative arc in the novel. When Solomon and Phoebe's life in Japan is being introduced, there is a very interesting passage exploring the mindset as natives and foreigners. In America, there is no such thing as Kankokujin or Chosunjin. Why the hell would I be a South Korean or a North Korean? That makes no sense. I was born in Seattle and my parents came to the States where there was only one Korea. She'd shout, relating one of the bigotry anecdotes of her day. Why does Japan so distinguish between the two countries for its Korean residents who've been here for 4 fucking generations? You were born here, you're not a foreigner, that's insane. Your father was born here, why are you two carrying South Korean passports? It's bizarre. She knew as well as he did that after the peninsula was divided, the Koreans and Japan ended up choosing sides, often more than one, affecting their residency status. It was still hard for a Korean to become a Japanese citizen, and there were many who considered such a thing shameful. For a Korean to try to become a citizen of its former oppressor, when she told her friends in New York about this curious historical anomaly and the pervasive ethnic bias, they were incredulous at the thought that the friendly, well mannered Japanese they knew could ever think she was somehow criminal, lazy, filthy, or aggressive. The negative stereotypical traits of Koreans in Japan. Well, everyone knows that the Koreans don't get along with the Japanese, her friends would say innocently, as if things were equal. Soon, Phoebe stopped talking about it with her friends back home. Solomon found it peculiar that Phoebe got so angry about the history of Koreans in Japan. After 3 months of living in Tokyo and reading a few history books, she'd concluded that the Japanese would never change. The government still refuses to acknowledge its war crimes. Strangely, in these conversations, Solomon found himself defending the Japanese. They planned on visiting Seoul together for a week when the deal season ended and work slowed down. He hoped Seoul would be some sort of neutral territory for them, a place to feel normal since they were both Korean immigrants of a kind, and it didn't hurt that Phoebe spoke very good Korean. His Korean was pathetic at best. He'd visited South Korea with his father several times, and everyone there always treated them like they were Japanese. It was no homecoming, however, it was great to visit. After a while, it had been easier just to play along as Japanese tourists who had come to enjoy the good barbecue rather than to try to explain to the chest beating, self righteous Koreans why their first language was Japanese. As the chapter goes on, Solomon describes his boss Kazu. Kazu was Japanese and had been far kinder to Solomon than most Koreans in Japan, who had occasionally eyed him with suspicion as a wealthy man's son or his competition at school. Yes, some Japanese thought Koreans were scum, but some Koreans were scum. He told Phoebe, some Japanese were scum too. There was no need to keep rehashing the past. He hoped Phoebe would get over it eventually. So later, Kazu himself talks to Solomon after his colleagues questions Solomon on his father's career in pachinko parlors and make assumptions about Solomon's past and history based on their own envy. It's not like Koreans had a lot of choices in regular professions. I'm sure he chose Pachinko because there wasn't much else. He's probably an excellent businessman. Maybe your dad could have worked for Fuji or Sony, but it wasn't like they were going to hire a Korean, right? I doubt they'd hire you now, Mr. Columbia University. Japan still doesn't hire Koreans to be teachers, cops, and nurses in a lot of places. You couldn't even rent your an apartment in Tokyo and you make good money. It's fucking 1989. Anyway, you can be polite about it, but that's fucked up. I'm Japanese, but I'm not stupid. I lived in America and Europe for a long time. It's crazy what the Japanese have done to the Koreans and the Chinese who were born here. It's fucking bonkers. You people should have a revolution. You don't protest enough. You and your dad were born here, right? So, the point of me narrating these different parts of the final chapters of the novel becomes then to emphasize the rift between identity, culture, and belonging of immigrants in a third space, and how Minjin Lee emphasizes these differences or these experiences through several of her characters. And while it's still a novel, and it's still fiction. These characters are drawn and created from stories collected through interviews and history and life and experience itself, so they themselves become evidence of their own. And that is exactly what I wanted to try and show with this podcast.